Your community could be the people all around you, right? Your doorman, your neighbors, the barista, people at the coffee shop. It's so important to really be intentional and to create these connections and not just kind of breeze by them. It's so easy to kind of look down and go through our similar path, but there's so many people and so many opportunities for connection around us.
Ever notice how you'll dodge a deadline by binge scrolling social media, even though you know it's crunch time? Or how a quick decision like picking a restaurant turns into a 20-minute spiral of second guessing? These aren't just random slip ups, they're self sabotage at work, quietly hijacking your day. So if you've ever wondered why you keep getting in your own way, you're in the right place. Say hello to Dr. Sabrina Romanoff, a clinical psychologist who's practically a detective of the mind. She's got the Harvard Medical School seal of approval, years of experience helping everyone from stressed out execs to overwhelmed teens. And her research has landed in major publications. Oh, and she's molding future psych pros at universities. Her credentials, rock solid. This episode is all about uncovering those hidden patterns, like how a scolding from age 6 or a forgotten fear might still be tripping you up now. Dr. Romanoff's opening up her tools for your success. Journaling tricks, CBT hacks, and emotional IQ tips to help you connect the dots between then and now. So if you're ready to stop holding yourself back or just curious about the hidden reasons behind those frustrating patterns, stick around. Let's get into it. Good afternoon, Sabrina. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
So great to be with you. Thanks for having me, Joe.
I wanted to sort of break down in psychological terms, your expertise. How do you define self-sabotage?
Great question. And I think it can be a little different for each of us, but I think it ultimately comes down to when our behaviors or even our thoughts or beliefs, they weaken the goals or values that we have. And usually it comes from this fear of change or discomfort or the unknown. So another way of looking at it is that it's this unconscious way to stay in the familiar. And in that sense, self-sabotage is actually a solution to a bigger problem of us being really afraid of what we don't know. So oftentimes we're afraid to take that leap or do something different because we don't totally have faith in ourselves. So psychologically, it's kind of like this coping mechanism to avoid threats or pain. And usually we create this bubble, almost like a protection, but so easily it becomes this jail cell, and only we really have the keys to take ourselves out of it.
So is it fair to say there's like a comfort in it, if it's a coping mechanism in some respect?
Absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head. I think there's a comfort, even though it's uncomfortable, it's like familiar. And there's something about it being familiar, we know what to expect. Like we can watch the same movie over and over again, and we might like not find it so exciting, but there's just something about that predictability that brings us towards it.
And are these typically trauma driven for the most part, do you think? Or can it sort of derive from anywhere?
Yeah, I think something that an old supervisor used to say is that a lot of people, they're operating on this one note dance or this one note song. Sometimes we get really stuck around a trauma or an instance in which we didn't get what we really needed, usually from our early life experiences with a caregiver. So let's say our caregiver was really preoccupied or emotionally unavailable. The cliche is that we are going to then seek out partners that recreate that same feeling in us. And you could see it as self-sabotage, but really it's us trying to recreate that problem so we can eventually find the solution. The problem is, though, that we are seeking the solution outside of ourselves. We're outsourcing the solution when really only we can make ourselves feel good enough.
Okay, understood. So would it be fair to say like people are repeating this behavior, which may make them unhappy, but is that all to sort of, I guess what you're saying is recreate that feeling they had maybe when they were a child? Why do you think people do that? Or why do you think that we're prone to that as a culture?
I think ultimately it's primed towards good, right? We call it the repetition compulsion in psychoanalysis. We are pulled towards creating this old pattern. It's almost like this impossible challenge. We don't realize that the game is actually rigged against us, but we hope that we can finally get that thing that we never really got. And that's why it can feel almost like a drug or something like outside of our control, because it's something that we've been craving from our whole lives. And then we're seeking out other people, almost strangers in our adult lives, to give us what we're really seeking for from our parents. And I think once you kind of have awareness of that pattern, you can finally break out of it and give yourself that validation.
So these early experiences we may have, how are they sort of shaping like the adult side of us? So say, like you said, the caretaker example, how does that sort of project itself as now that child as an adult that may have their own children or, a company or employees under them? How's that shape their behavior? And are they recreating that with their own children?
Absolutely. There's this term called transgenerational transmission of trauma. And oftentimes these patterns, they repeat in generation after generation. So like the most common trauma is us not feeling good enough because maybe not all of our needs were met in childhood, which is a pretty ubiquitous experience. We can all have good enough parents, which is what we strive for, like in a psychological term when it comes to parenthood, but we're never going to be perfect all the time. So anytime that that need was unmet, it might serve as a little t trauma. And because of that, we might not feel good enough. So we internalize that as to mean we're bad. That's why our parents couldn't give us what we needed. And then we go out in the world and we seek that validation through so many other things, especially in this capitalist society. We'll try to buy things that make us feel good enough or appear from the outside that we're enough. We might use relationships or all different things to show our status and that we're finally enough. And unfortunately, if that question is still lingering in our heads, it's really about us getting what we need and not about what we can give to our children. So oftentimes when we have kids, it's so much more stress and so much more is expected of us to give that unfortunately it gives us less capability to then give that validation to the next generation.
So, say someone had the caregiver example again that you used, and they felt that they were never good enough. Are they now overcompensating as an adult to like be there for everything for the child, so their child never feels that?
You hit the nail right on the head. Trauma is a pattern, but a complementary pattern. And often we are overcorrecting and undercorrecting through the generations. So let's say you had a parent who was unavailable, they were distracted, they had so much else going on, or they were completely stressed, couldn't meet all of your needs. So you might grow up saying, I never want my child to feel my pain, but inadvertently you're going to cause a whole other pain. That might mean that you will be totally over involved. You might micromanage them and you might not really give them the space to be themselves, that you are going to kind of create so much symbiotic kind of connection and conditional validation by making sure that they're always there and that they're always happy, that they're
Yeah.
going to want to meet your needs versus them authentically living their lives.
Yeah, like for me, I had a great childhood growing up. My parents, I mean, they were divorced, but it was like, I had solid homes, but I was alone after school sometimes, like, the latchkey kid, not, to make it dramatic, but, you'd come home sometimes and you'd be 9, 10 years old. You may have to stay alone for a little while. So I think subconsciously now for me, I like to pick my daughter up and I like to make sure that she doesn't have to get come home alone and be alone in the house. I don't know, that's sort of me as patient, but it's kind of that thing where I always am subconsciously like, no, I need to work my schedule around making sure she doesn't have to come home alone. And I wonder if that's what I'm drawing from in the past, not to have you play my doctor, but I'm trying to like relate it to myself.
Absolutely. Look, that sounds like a very benign example and a loving and thoughtful one. I think a really helpful question is to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Am I doing it out of fear? Is this something unconscious that's kind of driving me towards this? Am I doing this to meet my own need that went unmet? So many times, especially in parenthood, we call them like ghosts in the nursery or ghosts in our children's rooms or whatever we're going through with them, that our own experience of when we were their age is replaying when we're with them. And a lot of the times we're trying to recreate or protect them from our own pain, but then we create so many other issues
Oh,
inadvertently down the line.
yeah, I'm sure this could go down the whole. My father, for clarity, is retired, but was a psychologist, so we're all in the same field here with my upbringing. How about like common examples? Like someone might think, okay, I'm such a procrastinator, or why is when I get dumped, I continually like text my ex and still reach out, even though they've made it clear they don't want to see me anymore. Would these be sort of like, again, any example, but two that I could think of, would these be examples of this behavior?
Absolutely. And great question. I think texting an ex is often very commonly this attempt to seek comfort or validation, even if it delays your healing. And maybe that ex didn't value you, or they made you feel not enough if they didn't want to be with you. So it could reignite the challenge of finally feeling chosen by them. And oftentimes these patterns are driven by our addiction to an emotion. So a lot of people, though not consciously, unconsciously, are addicted to not feeling good enough. So they will continue to go back to partners that don't make them feel that great about themselves. So they'll keep on reaching out to the person that doesn't want them to finally feel enough to be wanted. It's kind of like outsourcing their self-worth and validation, but it only gives you temporary effects. It's going to run out eventually.
Well, exactly, right? When you're continuously rejected with the outreach to this person that has no interest anymore, is it also sort of like pushing you back more in progress you could have been making by adopting a different behavioral pattern?
Absolutely. And I think it delays healing and it just keeps you stuck again in that really familiar place. A lot of the times it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy that we seek out these people that have the illusion or the allure of giving us a different ending to the same story we've lived thousands of times, but we don't realize that we're the ones actually creating the ending. And it's only when we take ourselves out of these situations that we can grow. It's the difference between listening to your emotions and your intellect. Our emotions so easily can drive our behaviors, but we have to really listen to what we want long term and do what's best for us.
Right. So, okay. So, say someone comes to you, and let's just use the texting the ex example. Like, how are you helping people, or what should people listening start trying to recognize in their own possible self sabotaging behaviors? Like, what is something that we could all look at and say, okay, I know it's bad when I do this, but how do I start to say this is sort of the way to get out of this negative pattern?
Great question. It all starts with insight and then turning that insight into change. So, one, look for patterns where you're feeling really frustrated or you're constantly feeling like not good enough. Journaling is a great way because you can just keep a log of, like, I call them the hot moments of your day or the triggers of the day. And then ask yourself, what's really driving this choice? Why do I keep on repeating this thing? What do I hope the outcome might be? So, journaling helps you spot these recurring patterns, these thoughts, the triggers, and it gives you distance from them. When you're taking time to really write it out, you can see yourself more clearly. And ultimately, it's all about creating space between your environment and what you're doing and your reactions so you could be much more intentional and thoughtful about it.
So, would it be something where someone's going to journal like the outcome of I'm now like whatever, a year, 6 months, 2 years from now, I am now not reaching out to that person, for example, or I whatever negative behavior I'm seeking, this is what I look like now, sort of free of that. Or is it just a daily sort of like slow build as to like this is what I'm feeling today, be in the moment?
It could be both, right? The first one you talked about was really celebrating your wins and how much you've really changed, which is huge. It's really looking at yourself outside of the pattern and how far you've made yourself kind of go towards your goals and your values. The second one is about in the moment. When you're feeling really stuck in it, it feels like you almost have no choice. It's automatically happening over and over again. So it's all about finding ways to create space to kind of pause and take one step outside of that pattern, because even just the smallest micro step, it's creating momentum for you to then take the next one. So it's all about some kind of forward movement.
Right. So how effective do you, because again, like with your specific practice, is journaling sort of like a key component to what most of your patients do for an activity?
Great question. I work with pretty high functioning people that are quite insightful, yet they struggle with like translating I'm so successful in these areas of my career, but like my relationships are kind of falling to the wayside. So it's all about creating a pause. And sometimes the easiest way to create that pause and space for reflection is by doing something tangible. So, like every day, really treating it like homework. Like, I'm going to really process what I like, what I don't like about my life. And I'm going to be really concise and clear about what my goal is here. And then I'm going to review, like, what did I do well today? What did I do that coincided with my values? Journaling is kind of like the most basic, right? Like pen and paper example. You can use your notes app in your phone just to process something that's really bothering you. And then eventually that process, it becomes internalized. You mentally can think, okay, what about this situation like isn't working for me? And what do I want to change about it? The whole goal is to try to create alternative perspectives. And you only can do that by like getting perspective. And you could do it in so many different ways.
Yeah. So if you start there, like, and again, obviously everyone has a different reason for coming to you, but like what other tools that you encourage your patients to use for people listening? So they might think, okay, journaling sounds like fairly easy. Someone should be able to get up or at the end of the day. Do you recommend either or before your day starts or at the end to reflect?
You have to really experiment in the beginning and see what really works for you. And then I call create a safety plan or like a go-to guide. Let's say you're kind of really in the dumps. You'll have a whole list of things that you know work really well for you. So the goal is to be able to find a way to pull that red thread from the surface to see what's actually going on for you under the hood. That could mean you doing hot yoga or taking a run outside. Maybe that's the way that you get perspective and you can really see, okay, all that stuff on the surface, that was distraction. This is what is really bothering me. Or let's say you tend to intellectualize. So maybe CBT could be better for you. The whole idea with cognitive behavioral therapy is that you are challenging and replacing your negative thoughts. It's very cognitive. So you're going to intentionally think of different interpretations about your environment and about your reactions. The whole thing about CBT is that it highlights your choice because so often our reality is really just the lens that we choose to see the world through. And we can choose that lens. It's usually given to us based on our past experiences, but that doesn't mean we can't fix it and adjust it.
So then is it an emphasis though, like when someone comes to you, do they ever talk about, oh, I can't sleep well? Or do you ever get into what they might be eating, how much they, like you said, exercise? Are those components of what you talk with people about?
Absolutely. And I think problems with sleep, with exercise, with eating, they're ubiquitous to whenever something is totally turning our world upside down. And it's usually the baseline of how we begin to recenter ourselves. Those are usually all symptoms of something came in and just completely unearthed my world. And it's so easy to focus on the problem, like that person who dumped you or getting fired or any really big life calamity or tragedy. So, really focusing again on the baseline ways that we can care for ourselves is essential to grounding ourselves and making ourselves the center of our world because we really only can find safety based on what we can provide ourselves with. When we create conditions for safety based on the outside, it makes us basically slaves or beholden to the people around us. And it can be so exhausting and stressful.
Yeah, exactly. And I what about like this self-compassion role? Like, what role would that play in someone making the positive change to free themselves from the negative behaviors?
Yeah, I think self compassion is huge when it comes to self blame and self fulfilling prophecies. Self compassion is basically the ability for us to face our flaws without punishment. And it's a very high level thing to do because it's so easy to get into this self blame cycle. I think the biggest reframe I try to teach a lot of my patients is that it's really about the lesson. It's not about guilt or blame. There's really no such thing as failure. You either learn a lesson, you become better, or you win. You get a step closer towards your goal. So it's really about creating a safe space for growth by reducing all that shame and self criticism. And it begins with self validation. You are completely valid for feeling the way you did and for maybe having that reaction, but you might not agree with the behavior that you chose to go with. So that's really the difference between acceptance and self validation. You can validate the emotion, but not necessarily the behavior. And I think change is very hard, but being kind to yourself is makes this much more doable.
And when you say kind to yourself, like, would that be something where if the journaling part comes into play, or could it be going to the spa and just having a self-care day kind of thing? Would those both be examples, or is it, one or the, like, how do you sort of coach your patients?
All the above. I think it's really helpful to get to know yourself well. What are the things that make you the most happy? For some of my clients, it's taking a walk, or for some people, it's calling their best friend. So I think it's really helpful to make a list. What are the things that you like to do activity wise that make you feel the best? Could be your favorite workout class or going to your favorite park. And then who are the people that make you feel so safe and connected? And are there different domains you can find these people in? Your family, friends, are there other outlets for you to make these connections? And then what are the things you like to do at home that make you feel good? So it's all about having this whole plan that you can fall back on when you're really feeling low.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, even when you read these articles about these centurion, like, the blue zones and everyone's living into their hundreds, it's that sense of community that sometimes, like, you're in a big city, I'm in a big city. Sometimes life is just passing by, and you don't really take the time to sort of connect with a community, and that can bring so much of the emotional wellness, I believe, to an individual that oftentimes we don't really get because everyone's so busy. You know.
Great point. And I think you have to create your own community. It's way harder in a big city, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. Your community could be the people all around you, right? Your doorman, your neighbors, the barista, people at the coffee shop. It's so important to really be intentional and to create these connections and not just kind of breeze by them. It's so easy to kind of look down and go through our similar path, but there's so many people and so many opportunities for connection around us.
What about like negative self-talk? How are people getting themselves out of that? Because I feel a lot of people I know, it's just they're so hard on themselves, but it's almost like a they just can't stop continuing to just always think they're a failure. In your practice, are you dealing with a lot of people that or mechanisms that you sort of can give that can help reduce this in people?
Great question. And I think negative self talk, we often talk about it as a problem, but often it's a solution. So many people don't feel good enough and they almost use it as like a rubber band. If I don't feel good enough, I'm going to pull myself way, way back and then I'm going to use it as rocket fuel. And that's what I'm going to use to kind of overcompensate and show everyone that I am enough. And unfortunately, negative self talk is a way that a lot of people motivate themselves. So, one, understand what you're really doing here. And like a lot of the time, the self sabotage loop is I'm going to make myself feel so, so low. So then I can make myself feel so high once I finally get what I want. I think negative self talk also can be a symptom of us never really feeling good enough and addiction to that feeling. So oftentimes we'll seek out experiences that confirm that belief. If someone didn't hold the door out for you, or you got rejected for that person you were interested in dating, or you didn't get that interview for the job you really wanted, so many times that validates this inner fear that we're just not enough. And sometimes we perpetuate that thought and we look for all the evidence instead of saying, hey, wait, there's alternatives here. And I think it's really hard but important to find ways outside of that perspective to see things differently.
So that's what you're sort of guiding them through, is to find those outside ways to get yourself out of that and move towards the positive. And I imagine journaling might help there too, right? Like, writing out what the others that, no, I'm not this, I'm actually this, or putting yourself up there more positive in a positive light by committing it to paper.
Absolutely. And I think negative self talk, it goes back to what we've been saying. That's the familiar, right? It keeps us stuck in that little jail cell, but it doesn't really get you to where you want to go, which is why it's so important to really identify your values, almost just write them down as a list. And then once you know exactly where you want to go, you can use them as a compass, right? Like you always can look down at your compass and say, which is my direction? What is my true north? And what step forward do I need to take to get closer towards that?
Oh, okay. And what about, I saw emotional literacy. For people listening, what is that and how can we practice it day to day?
Great question. So, emotional literacy, it's the ability to identify and understand and regulate your emotions, which sounds simple, but it's often so difficult in practice. So you can start small just by naming your emotions throughout the day. Like, I'm feeling so anxious right now, or I'm feeling really frustrated. And just the process of naming it, it decenters you from the emotion, and it's almost like something outside of your body. And the idea is to not identify with the emotion you're feeling or the thought that you're feeling, and instead just notice it and let it pass. I like the analogy that people use that our emotions or our thoughts, they're just like clouds passing over us in the sky. You can watch them pass without over identifying with them or being too reactive. Another thing that I like to do is ask patients how their emotions are actually lessons or messengers. So you can ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to tell me? What is it trying to teach me? Let's say you're feeling angry. It's a really complicated emotion because most of us were not allowed to be angry as kids. Oftentimes it threatened our parents and it threatened our attachment to them, right? They put us in timeout or we had to be alone. And that could be terrifying. So we've learned to suppress our anger at all costs. But our anger is really important. It's telling us that a boundary has been violated. And it's really important to listen to our anger and then use it for good instead of a destructive cause. So maybe someone made you feel like they took advantage of you or something was unjust. So you should use that anger in a way to stick up for yourself.
Like sticking up for themselves, meaning like someone charged you over what you should have been charged. Is it going back and addressing the situation and taking it head on and saying, instead of just walking away irritated, I'm going to go back and make right on this and make myself feel valid. Now I'm not angry because I got what I was fair to me.
It's a great question. First, you have to look at your reaction. Sometimes we become incredibly angry over situations that don't justify that level of reaction. So, a lot of the time, because we're not feeling safe to express our anger in our core relationships or in really important areas of our life, we will express or expel all of our anger into these safe receptacles for them. Often, that's what road rage looks like. That's what getting really angry at someone who at the store who doesn't really mean much to us, but we become explosive towards them. So, one, look at your ability to express your anger in other areas. And if you are creating these safe receptacles for anger where it doesn't really belong. The second part is, again, ask yourself, what is my anger really telling me? If I feel like someone intentionally, like, wronged me in the store, it makes sense that I'd want to be really rational, level headed, but definitely act on that, right? Like try to justify the situation. But let's say it's road rage and someone cuts you off in traffic, which is really common. A lot of the times, this stems from a much more underlying fear of being taken advantage of or feeling unjust, that people are going to kind of step all over you. And usually it's not about that stranger that cut you off, because when we can take the pause and say, where is this really coming from? Well, it's an old script of me feeling taken advantage of, or like people are going to hurt me. You could see, well, wait, there's other possibilities here. Maybe they're late for work, or maybe they had an emergency that I don't know about. So it's all about pausing, because then you can fill in all the assumptions that our old stories or our usual scripts tend to make.
So, okay, that's a great example. Like the road rage. Everyone, like you said, has experienced someone cutting them off on the freeway. Some of us, like you said, don't care, whatever. It's just life. And other people are like, oh my gosh, and they're beeping their horn and trying to cut them off. And so you have like obviously extreme examples on the one end. But what would something that they experience earlier in their life trigger that angry response? What could you elaborate on what that something like an example could be?
Great question. Yeah, and it goes back to those scripts of self-sabotage. Let's say you had a parent who you felt abused their power as a kid, or they treated one sibling way different than they treated you, and it felt like you were totally powerless in that situation. That can make you much more primed to feel like people are abusing their power or they're hurting you versus seeing the full picture. So I think it's really helpful to consider the red threads or the scripts that we are applying to our present day life that don't totally match up, right? So we're not totally seeing the people around us or the world around us so clearly. We're seeing it through the lens of our past experience, because our brains are kind of these repetition pattern machines. They're applying everything we learned about the world so we can create safety much more quicker in the present. And the issue is that we are primed towards threat and danger because of that, because we're use our primitive brains to getting mauled by a tiger or a lion in the jungle, that we need to think really quickly. But oftentimes those fears or dangers aren't really present, and we need to kind of calm our brain down by thinking, what are the alternatives here?
So okay, so calming the brain down is the practice of just thinking what are the alternatives.
Absolutely. So again, it's all about creating the pause, not acting immediately in the moment. So if you can try to calm your body down first, that's the best place to start. Deep breathing or just taking 10 seconds to kind of calm your mind. There's grounding techniques that people find really helpful. So you can use your five senses and look at what are five things I can see, four things I can hear, something I can taste. And the whole idea is you're distracting yourself, you're taking yourself out of your mind and into the present moment.
Guys, it's just like that fight or flight sympathetic mode we're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fight
Okay.
or flight, we are geared for survival and death. And that can really prime us to not be in the best state of mind to make decisions.
Right. No, no, that's true because you do. Because I'm in Los Angeles, right? Like people are cutting you off all the time. And I can't imagine as a child someone having to learn how to drive on the freeways. And of course, like obviously where you are and people listening, like there's traffic that's not fun everywhere. But out here, you just are just intersecting freeways and things like that. So that's great advice for me personally, because sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, why is this irritating me so much? But if you had to give maybe one thing people could do today to start making more self-supportive choices, is there one like piece of advice you could offer?
Yeah, great question. I think self-sabotage, it's a human experience, right? So it never fully disappears. And that's a good thing because it's a part of our body's mechanism to keep us safe and in these predictable environments. So the goal isn't perfection, but it's really recognizing and interrupting that cycle faster. When we finally kind of slow down and have more awareness, it gives us the power to choose differently, even when those old habits resurface. And they might never totally go away, but it will be much easier the more repetitions we get to create these new patterns of relating to the people and the world around us.
So okay, so these patterns, like how long? And again, obviously everyone's different, and I'm not trying to say like one person's experience and upbringing and trauma that they're all like a one size fits all. But realistically, someone who might be working with you, when do you start to see okay, whether it's small or large, progress being made in the patterns that they're trying to change?
Great question. And it's often one of the first questions I get when people are seeking therapy. And unfortunately, there's no one size that fits all. A lot of research shows that it takes about 2 months on average to form a new habit. But emotional patterns, they can take so much longer. They involve rewiring deep seated beliefs that usually take a lifetime to instill. So the timeline, it's really depending on your consistency, your self-awareness, your support systems, how many stressors you have in your life. But really it's about every day, again, looking at your compass, what's your value, and creating steps towards it. I think a really helpful way to think about progress is that all movement is helpful. It can be forward or it could be backwards, like we talked about. Either you're moving closer towards your goal or you've had a setback and you're using it as a lesson. It's an opportunity to grow and become better.
That's a very positive way to look at it. So that's good. Even if you're moving backwards, it's still movement, but we're going to get you back on track and keep pushing forward. The North Star. You have a lot of great analogies and examples. So it helps to paint the picture. So could someone actually ever be free of self-sabotage, or is this sort of something that it's always going to be there, but you know how to correct it, correct the pattern, more awareness. You're not really striving for like a perfection throughout your life.
Exactly. And I think it's a good thing, right? Like self-sabotage, we can look at it through a different lens. This is something that our body has to keep us really safe, to keep us in that bubble. And we want to exist in this safe, predictable place in a lot of areas in our lives. And that's a good thing. But it's important to recognize when it's not really serving us and that we always have the option to change it. Every day, every argument, every conflict that we notice ourselves in, that's an opportunity to do it differently. And that can be so empowering. And you have to celebrate those times where you really choose something that's for your long term good and not just what feels good in the moment.
Okay, so always be thinking about, right, the future and how is this going to serve me a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now kind of thing.
Absolutely. You said something too. I was also thinking about how to make better choices. Is always just pause and ask yourself, is this choice moving me towards or away from my goal? And just asking yourself that and having the awareness, maybe it is moving you away, but it's helpful just to know. So if you have your goal, you know where you're going, and you can always kind of recalibrate again, like look down at your compass and make sure you're on track, or at least you know where you want to be. And then also you can think, what's one small habit that I can start or something that I can stop that will align with my goal? So when you identify that, you're creating accountability.
It's like a lot of muscle memory. It feels like you're building with people. So they start to now internalize, okay, this is what I'm feeling, and here's the steps, and here's how I can correct. And they can kind of do it on the spot. I imagine after a while, it becomes a lot quicker. Is that safe to say?
Exactly. That's all that habits are, right? When you're a little kid, the last thing you want to do is brush your teeth every night or take a bath. Your parents are
Yeah.
begging you to do this. And then when you're an adult, it's second nature. That's
Yeah.
just what you do right when you wake up. So it's kind of like that, or even like the big things, right? When you're a kid going to kindergarten, terrifying, really scary, or your very first presentation in front of the class, horrifying. But the more and more you did it, the easier it got. And it's just about the repetition compulsion and also exposure to the things that are really hard or that are scary to us.
Is that something you recommend for people? Like they're afraid of whatever, but is it kind of embracing the fear by putting yourself in the situations, or like, can you clarify what that means?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the easiest ways to gain confidence. It's okay to feel fear, accept it, but don't let it stop you from doing what means most to you. So I think looking back, the things that you were terrified of doing but did anyway is the greatest way to feel proud of yourself and accomplishment. Because so often it's not about the outcome or the external kind of marker of success, it's about the process. And that's one of the most incredible things we can do for ourselves.
Yeah. So, okay. So if you had to say, all right, maybe one myth, people have these, therapists. Oh, I don't need this. I don't need to read this book. I don't need to journal, but they're also some of the same people that are very susceptible to falling into these negative behaviors and are very guilty of the things that someone like yourself could help firsthand, right? What do you think one myth about therapy, self growth, that that sort of needs to, like, okay, let's just get rid of this one.
Great question. I think a huge myth out there is that, or the idea that you need to be broken to go to therapy. Therapy is so much more often for growth. It's not just for crisis. And I think it works best when we are feeling stable and we want to grow towards our goals. So I think therapy can best be seen as a way or like a tool to seek clarity, to seek peace, to get the things that we really want in life. I think also healing, it's not linear. Sometimes we enter therapy and we feel okay, and it might unearth all these things that we've been avoiding. And I think that setbacks or like not always feeling great after therapy, it's part of the process. It's about feeling all the things that maybe we've been carrying that we haven't been feeling safe enough to process. And that's not a proof of your failure, it's all a part of the journey.
Yeah, sort of trust the process, for a sports analogy, I guess. How about your practice specifically? Like, how is it set up? Do you do televisits? Is it only in person?
All the above. So I see people in person in my office. I also do telehealth based on what could be best for each person.
And how would someone who's, listening, what's the best way to sort of connect with you and reach out to say, okay, here's what I'm going through. Is there opportunity for us to, do you do a first call and then sort of evaluate the situation? Like, how does working with you, like, the first step?
Great question. Yeah, so you can reach out to me through my website at drsabrinaromanoff.com. Click connect, and we could schedule a consult call and go from there.
Perfect. And then that's drsabrinaromanoff.com. I will make sure that's in the show notes, and obviously for people listening to reach out to you directly. But thank you so much for your time today. This was like very, very, very insightful and just impactful. All this stuff that I think that everyone listening knows themselves or someone they know that is 100% not to say guilty because that's a negative way to say it, but, certainly there are behavior patterns that we can all sort of relate to in listening to you talk. So thank you so much for just sharing all that information. And for people listening, obviously, you know how to reach out to Dr. Romanoff.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I had such a great time speaking with you.